Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see everybody. A degree of festivity, but, within moderation, and who knows, we've got 57 minutes together, so who knows, it could evolve in different ways. But it's really lovely to see everybody here. This is the final Friday call of the year. I don't know, I'm beginning to feel a bit festive. Usually it's a bit later than this for me. But I think one or two things have happened. I've seen one or two things. Went to a lovely light switch on at the Swan Inn, which is the local pub here in Cockermouth, where the Mechanics Brass Band played outside to begin with. Those of you who know the Swan, it's not a big pub. And then they all piled in and played inside the pub, which was fantastic. Lots of carols and some mince pies and sausage rolls and no room to move whatsoever. And it was lovely. And it's been so cold, and the lights in Cockermouth are also very beautiful every year. So that, I think, has switched me into feeling a little bit festive. But this morning, we're going to think a bit about, thank you, Ian. And hopefully at some stage, Ian might reveal his particularly second set of headgear, which we saw, those of us that were here at 9:15 saw earlier. So that may be something to look forward to as the call progresses as well. I'm just going to ask you to think about your cultural highlights for the year as well. We'll come back to this, but if there's anything that you've seen in Cumbria or outside Cumbria that you just want to mention, we'll come back to that towards the second half of the call. It'd just be good to have a lovely roundup of great stuff that's happened this year across the county that has been inspiring or just been fun or just great. So feel free, anything that you might have been involved in or someone else has been involved in, or that you've seen or witnessed or taken part in or sung in or played in or whatever, that would be lovely just to kind of get a little clutch of those together as well. But first of all, we are going to hear from Kate. The main dish of the day is Kim Moore, who a lot of you will know. There she is in a massively well-stocked library. And Kim did an amazing thing just a few weeks ago. She won the Forward Prize for Best Collection for her, actually not that new collection of All the Men I Never Married, which came out probably about a year ago, Kim. Is that right? I don't know, but I remember it coming out. And Kim's been doing all sorts of things to do with poetry in Cumbria for many years, and she's getting a huge amount of national recognition now as well. So, and of course, she is one of ours. She's technically, I think you're from Leicester originally, aren't you, Kim? Is that right?
Yes, yeah, many years ago.
How long have you been in Barrow for?
Since I was 22, so 20 years now. All
right. So I think, can we claim you as a Cumbrian now?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I hope so.
I think so. So we're going to come back, find out a bit more about Kim, and we might even hear a couple of poems if we're lucky, and just find out about that whole sort of journey to getting to the Forward Prize and what happens next as well. So thank you, Kim, for joining us this morning. But first of all, Kate, did you, as our chair of the network, did you just want to sort of reflect on the year, or the kind of where the network's at, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I wasn't laughing at Kim's poetry. By the way, I was just laughing at Derek's hairdo, which took me by surprise somewhat. Anyway, it's really nice to see everybody. And I do like it when we're a neat and tidy number on one screen. So yeah, my just quick roundup of the year, really. We started off back in January with the announcement that we had 3 years of funding from Sellafield Social Impact Programme of £25,000 for this year, next, and the one after. So that was a really good start to the year. Well, we then went to Braithey for our session on ambition and quality, which was a really good day, face to face for the first time in such a long time. And wasn't it nice to see everybody? And since then, I'm not actually going to read out the whole list of people that we've spoken to, but when you look at it, it's so inspiring and entertaining, whether it's Andy Smith from Kendal Calling to Daniel Ibbotson before he headed off to the Venice Biennale, Stuart McConey, brilliant Josh and Josh, musicians from Barrow, Michelle Taylor talking about disability awareness training that many of you then subsequently joined, Aldo Rinaldi from the project on the West Coast, followed by Rory Castle and Jones off the telly, our very own Al Critchlow and Daniel Tyler McTighe from Barrow, the CPP. Lee Schofield, the Cumbrian author and naturalist. We've had more serious sessions, for example, with Lindsay from the LEP about business links and how the LEP can support us. We've heard about the Volunteering Futures programme, Helping Hands, that's being run by Cumbria Museum Consortium. Do you remember Rachel Head from the Braithwaite Trust talking about the Changing Culture programme with James Cobbold from Theatre by the Lake? Lorraine from the Anne Frank Trust, Lee from the Carnegie, Sue's brilliant Conrad Atkinson tributes, if you remember that. I think that goes down as my favourite call this year. Victoria Balbay from the university, Safina Aziz from Curious Minds, not so long back. Really good session with Hazel Stone about the Lumberjills very recently, right up until last week when I really enjoyed hearing about the Mahogany Opera. So I just think there's been so much that's been interesting, and I'm interested to know from you what your highlights have been. Those are mine, from a very, very long list of people. At the end of the session, I'm going to talk a tiny bit more about what our plans are for next year, but those are my really good memories of what, frankly, has not always been the easiest year, hot on the heels of an even worse year the year before. So hurrah for us for still being here every Friday morning and carrying on, as Rob would say. Okay, Tom, back to you.
Thank you, Kate. And do you want to just mention the stats for, the sort of social media and the newsletter, that kind of thing?
Yeah, just a minute whilst I open that up. It's gone to sleep. So we now have just under 1,500 people on our Facebook group, nearly 2,000 people on Twitter followers, and 1,500 on Instagram as well, and 525 people on our newsletter. So we continue to grow bit by bit each month, and a hurrah for that as well.
Excellent, thank you, Kate. And then look ahead to the future towards the end of the call. As Sue mentions, a beautiful article that Sue wrote about the network in Cumbria Life Mag back at the start of this year, which was great. Great to see. So thank you for helping with that, Sue, as well. Lovely. Okay, well, I think it's time to hear a bit about the 2022 Forward Prize winning poet for Best Collection now, and her name is Kim Moore, and she lives in Barrow, and we're very proud that she is one of us. What brought you north, Kim? What brought you north from Leicester back in whenever it was, 20 years ago?
A job. I'd qualified as a secondary school music teacher, but my qualification, I specialised in trumpet, like brass teaching. And then when I was looking for a job, there was only 2 full-time brass teaching jobs advertised in the whole country, and one was in Southampton and one was in Cumbria. So I didn't even know where I was coming when I went for the job in Cumbria. I knew it was vaguely north. And, so, yeah, and then I ended up in Barrow because it was the cheapest place to live. But I was teaching all across Kendal and up to Kirkby Lonsdale and Appleby, and on the west coast as well. I was doing a little bit in Workington and Egremont. They sent me everywhere. So
you were teaching trumpet kind of full time? Yeah, for
12 years I taught full time for 8 years, and then gradually went part time after that. Okay. But yeah, and not just trumpet, like all the brass instruments, had to teach everything.
You enjoy that?
Yeah, I did. I think I was ready to leave by the end of it. I think you get burnt out when you're teaching in schools, and when I started to not be as patient, I realized it was time to go. And then I applied for some funding to do a PhD, and that's when I finally made the leap away from it.
And were you writing all this time as well?
I always wrote by myself, but it was only really coming to Cumbria when I showed other people my poetry. So I joined Fourth Monday Poets in Ulverston, which is run by Mark Carson and is still going now. And they were really lovely and kind. And I didn't know anybody here when I moved, so it was like the first social thing that I went to. It was really like desperation that drove me to go to a poetry group and show people my poems, because just to try and make some friends.
And did you write at school in English lessons and all that sort of stuff, or did it come later? Or
Yeah, I did. I had a really nice English teacher who I used to give her like stories that I'd written and things, but I didn't really write a lot of poetry, although I liked reading it. I really started writing poetry at university, I think. But just for myself again, I didn't go to any creative writing things.
As someone who has been to a number of your carousels, and we'll come on to what you've done for the poetry scene in Cumbria in a minute, that moment, and people that have written poetry or done all sorts of different art forms will relate to this. That moment when for the first time you kind of read something out to somebody else, perhaps in public for the first time, is a bit of a moment for a lot of people. Can you sort of remember the first time that you stood up and performed some of your work?
Yeah, like an open mic. It was yeah, it was at Lancaster Spotlight. And I went 1 month, and I didn't know you had to sign up in advance, and I kind of got the courage up to go and ask Ron and Sarah for a spot, and they said, oh no, they're all full. And I remember being like absolutely gutted, and I thought, oh, I actually do want to do it, I'm not that nervous. And then the next month I signed up, I got myself organized, and yeah, I remember standing up because I remember my legs were shaking, and I was thinking, oh no, everyone's going to be able to tell that my legs are shaking while I'm reading. Yeah, and then after I read that poem, Ron came up to me and said, oh, do you want to do a guest spot? And I think they paid something like £15 for a guest spot at that point. And I was like, wow, you can get paid money for reading poetry, even though it was only £15. But it wasn't really about the money. It was about him, you know, that he came up and said, oh, would you like to do a longer set? Someone saying, I liked what you did. That was a really important moment for me.
That sort of sense of someone believing in you.
Yeah, and just giving you a chance, and yeah, it was nice.
And then you know, how do you write poetry? You know, what do you write on? Where do you do it? When do you do it? Do you go through barren spells, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, well, I just write in my notebook normally, and then leave it for quite a long time, and then eventually I'll type it up. That's when I put line. So when I write my notebook, it's just prose, but I know it's going to be a poem, and then I'll type it up onto the computer. If I'm writing prose, I normally write straight onto my laptop because it takes too long otherwise. And I can't remember the rest of your question, Tom. What was the rest of it?
You know, people are always fascinated, I am anyway, in how writers actually write. And do they, you know, some people put a set time of day to one side, some people use a pen, some people bang out on a typewriter. It's fascinating to see how different people do different things. I'm just interested in what your process is.
Yeah, I used to be really disciplined and write every day when I was like starting out, and now I'm a bit my process is just different now because I've got a 3-year-old, and it just has to fit in around other things. But I'm in one of those fallow periods where I'm not writing, because although the book came out in October, it still feels very new, and it was like it's 6 years worth of work. And then I had this little book about trumpet playing come out in May, and then since then I've been working on turning my PhD thesis into a hybrid book of essays and poetry, and that's coming out in March. So that's all done now. So I'm just going through the proofs and everything. So I'm in like the editing stage, and I find it really hard to be creative or think of what I'm going to do next at this point. I just feel like at the moment I feel like I never want to write again. I just want to sit and read and like recharge my brain. I don't feel like I've got anything new to say at the moment.
Jill just asked in the chat, you know, somehow I think you will have something else to say. I'm not worried about that. What's the thesis? What's the title of the thesis?
So the thesis was called Poetry and Everyday Sexism. So I was looking at what happens when you write poems about moments of everyday sexism that you know, like things that happen to you that you might not necessarily even tell anyone about, is how I started out. But how I finished is realizing that I was using sexism as quite a fluid, kind of slippery term for a lot of different acts of microaggression, ranging from microaggressions right up to more serious forms of assault. And so I was looking at what happens when you put the space of a poem around that, and then it also became quite I started performing those poems at readings, and then I started to write about the reactions of audience members. So a lot of the time I got really lovely reactions from people, from men and women, and then sometimes I got really quite defensive or even aggressive reactions from people. So I started writing about that, just as a way of kind of processing it. But at first it really upset me, and then so I was also leaping to defensiveness as well. So I started to kind of look at my reactions, and then I started to really enjoy when those moments happened, because there's such energy in the room. And you know, every time it happened, I would think, that's another 3,000 words of my thesis that you've just given me as a gift.
Do you have conversations with people who had reacted afterwards?
Yeah, well, people come up to you and speak. Of course, people come up to you and speak at poetry readings, and you know, some of those conversations were really heartbreaking. Really, like I've had young girls come up and say. One young girl came up to me and said, "What advice? I'm going to university next year. What advice would you give me to help me, like, be safe?" Like, it's just heartbreaking that, you know, that young women are still having to deal with that. But then, you know, I've had like, I'm trying to think of an example now. I've had like men cut. Well, the best one, the one that the first time this happened, I was given a reading from my thesis from the critical writing, and I said the first sentence like I'm writing a thesis about poetry and everyday sexism, and a man interrupted me to tell me that sexism doesn't exist, which I thought was quite funny that he interrupted to tell me that. And you know, I was really taken aback, and luckily the organizer kind of jumped in and said something like, "Oh, well, Kim will be taking questions at the end." And I was like, it wasn't a question, it was just it was a comment. But anyway, and then later on in the quick Q&A, a friend of mine who was a man put his hand up and said, "Oh, sexism does exist, because I experienced it in 1975 when I worked in a factory, and I used to get my bum pinched by the women." So I started to think about, like, he was trying to be helpful, but I started to think about the kind of danger of analogies, and like, you know, like when someone says, "Oh, this has happened," and you go, "Oh yeah, that happened to me, blah blah blah," and it's not quite the same. And what happens is you steal the kind of, it's almost like taking the center ground from the person who was speaking about, you know, like if someone says, "Oh, I've experienced racism," and I say, "Oh, I experienced that once in such and such," it's taking the center ground from that person and not listening, and not it's not very helpful really, because, you know, so I started writing about that, like the day, which every time one of those interactions happened, I would then just go and do some either critical research, like the danger of analogies from Grillo and Wildman's paper from 1984 or something, or I would go and write a poem about it. So it would either send me off into creative or critical directions.
So the collection was growing as the PhD was sort of being written in parallel.
Yeah, it was a creative critical PhD. So the collection is the PhD.
Yeah.
But the creative critical PhD is a creative work, like a book of novels or poems or whatever, or short stories, and then normally like a critical, however many words. So I think mine could be between 40 and 70,000 words commentary. And some people just look at other poets that have influenced them. That's quite a kind of traditional way of doing a creative PhD, but I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to be more kind of creative with it. And I was interested in this thing that happens in performance as well. It's such a big part of my writing anyway, like going out and meeting people. So.
Ian asks in chat, has your work become more performative, or has that always been important to you?
I don't know exactly what you mean by performative, Ian.
Ian, come off mute and tell us what you mean.
I suppose I'm thinking about poets who are a lot of physical input, and so it's important how they deliver it as much as the content, and poets who are very purist, if you like, and they're concentrating just on the words, not on how the words are delivered or what elements of performance go around it.
Yeah, okay. I would say when I'm writing, I'm just writing. I'm not writing for anyone or for any particular situation. I'm not writing to perform them, but the performance is a really important part of my editing process. Like, I like hearing how the words sound in the air when there's other people in the room is different to how they sound on the air when you're on your own. And I do think a lot about how I'm going to perform, but I wouldn't call myself, well, like, all of these labels are problematic anyway, but like the performance poet or a page poet, I would like to think they work in both arenas. But then some poems I don't read out, like some of the quieter poems, because I don't think they work as well in like a performance space. So I don't know if that, but performance as a thing is really important to me in terms of editing and try and work out. And also just I really like performing as well. I enjoy it. I do like meeting people. I don't want to sound like I just shout at everyone at every reading. I try not to shout.
I've heard you perform a number of times, Kim, and I got this quote that I found of someone who'd reviewed your collection, and she said, "I write poetry." Sorry, that you'd said, I think, "I write poetry that refuses to look away. I write poetry that refuses to look away." Do you remember saying that?
Yes, yeah, because again, that was like a big part of my PhD thesis and research, like this decision about what we choose to look at in poetry and what we choose not to look at. And like one of the most political books of poetry I've read is a book called Oak by Catherine Towers, which looks at the whole life cycle of an oak, which on the face of it might not seem very political, but I think in a world where we're constantly encouraged to keep scrolling past social media and to like have our attention flickering from thing to thing, to just say, no, I'm going to look at this one thing, an oak, and especially in this time of climate crisis, to do that, that's a massively like political and decision and an interesting decision. So I don't mean like when I say I refuse to look away, I think that kind of gift of attention, to give that to something, is a political act for me, and it's an important kind of creative process. Every time I make these pronouncements though, I think, I wonder what it would be like to write a poem that does just flicker from thing to thing. You know, I don't mean all poetry should do that, but it was just what I was interested in this stage.
Would you be in a position to read a poem for us, Kim, this morning?
Yes, yeah.
I heard you on Front Row. Was it last week? And you read a poem. I'm not saying you should read the same one, but it was one that I think you didn't always read very often from the collection. And I thought it was really interesting to hear you read it. And the way that you read it was lovely. So I just wondered if you'd like to choose one to read out for us from the collection. That would be lovely.
Yeah, I can read that one if you want me to. If you want that one.
That was a beautiful poem, but I want you to choose what you want to read.
Okay. Well, maybe I will read. I can read that one because it as well as writing about poems about sexism, I was also writing, the collection really started in two places. So wanting to write poems about sexism, but then even before that, I wrote a kind of list poem of about ex-boyfriends. I thought I was after my first collection, I was in this kind of space again of I'm never going to write again. I've got nothing interesting to say. And as a joke, I thought I'll write a list poem of all my terrible ex-boyfriends. And I really enjoyed it. It was like my most fun time of writing. Like I can still remember like laughing to myself as I was writing this poem. And then when I got to the end, I thought I could just write a poem up just to keep myself busy. I'll just give each one of those men a poem all by themselves, and that will keep me busy until I think of a proper idea. And then the sexism thing started, and then the two started to overlap, as I realized as soon as you start talking about a sexual history as a woman, sexism comes into the room anyway. So the things kind of started to intersect. So that's the kind of, but so this is one of the if I'm talking in an academic context, I call them female desire poems, but with as we're amongst friends, I'll just call them an ex-boyfriend poems. And this is, so I don't really read them out because I find them much more, that I feel they're more vulnerable than the sexism poems. So this is All the Men I Never Married, number 10. 2 hours with you, sitting at opposite ends of your single bed. Living the dream, you say. I can't tell if this is sarcasm. Your feet level with my chest, my feet level with your waist. Almost like being a teenager again. Almost like a giving in. You put your hand on my ankle. Your eyes are closed. A train passes, the room shudders. The only thing speaking is your hand, the slow circle of your thumb. I can't tell if you're dreaming or if this is something else. Do we all have an ex we can't forget? Not the one that got away, but the one who left. Not the one who left for good, but the one that stays just out of reach. Your thumb relearning the bone of my ankle. I know your patterns. I know how this goes. Maybe we have nothing left to talk about anymore. Can you feel my body humming underneath your fingers? Do we all have someone we can't forgive?
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. What a beautiful poem. Did he know it was about him?
Yes. Yeah. So well, actually, I did send the person that poem is about, I sent the whole manuscript to them because he's so lucky he's got a few poems about himself. But I did think I'm not going to spell out which ones are you.
Yeah.
You know, and I said, if you've got a problem with any of them, or if any of them upset you, then you could, you know, we're really good friends now. And that was the interesting thing about writing those poems, because I had to send myself back to that time when I was like heartbroken. Like I found them actually much more painful to write than the sexism poems, because the poems about sexism, I was trying to work out why I remembered a particular incident, or trying to work out how I felt about something. So it was like a kind of discovery all the time. Whereas those poems, I knew how hard it was. You know, I was sending myself back to this time when I was quite unhappy. So I found those quite difficult to write. So maybe that's another reason I don't often read them out. But yeah, he does know, and he didn't mind. And because we're really good friends, so if he had a problem with any of them, then I would have edited or pulled it. Or
it's a gorgeous poem. Tell us about the moment, Kim, that it was announced that you'd won the prize. What happened? Where were you? Were you there at the ceremony? I guess you were.
Yeah. So it was held in Manchester this year for the first time. The Forward Prizes have come out of London in their 30-year history. So it was that was great, because I only had to go to Manchester instead of London.
And hadn't you been a judge the year before, 2 years ago or something? I can't remember.
Yeah, a couple of years ago. Yeah, about 3 years ago, I think it was. So I mean, just being on the shortlist was wonderful, and I didn't really expect anything else. Obviously, I thought it would have been nice to win, but I know the level of attention and care that you give to the books on the shortlist as the judge, and how hard it is to get down to that final 5. So that felt like, because I'd seen it from the inside, I was genuinely happy to just be on the shortlist, and anything else was a kind of bonus. But then on the day, we had to be there at like 12 o'clock for sound check, and all in the publicity material, one of the American poets who was shortlisted wasn't on any of the material, Kaveh Akbar, and then he suddenly appeared at the sound check. So I thought, oh, he's clearly won, and they've tipped him off and flown him in to like get his prize. So then I was like, oh, it doesn't matter now, I can just have a really nice time with my friends and just drink all day. And so, and then when we were stood on, you read one poem, and you're all sitting on stage, and then they take you off backstage, and then they announce it while you're backstage. And I was stood right at the back, because I was like, it doesn't really, you know, I know I've not won, it's Kaveh. And I was looking at Kaveh's face thinking, you don't see like kind of joy on someone's, like unadulterated joy very often. So I'm going to live vicariously through Kaveh Akbar when this is announced. That's how convinced I was. And then when they said my name, I was like, it felt like someone had like punched me in the chest. Actually, I was so shocked. Yeah, and then you have to go back on stage, and they tell you beforehand. They emailed us all and said, pick a poem that you want to, in case you win, pick a poem. And I had to send that for the screen sharing, for the captioners, but they told us to write a speech as well. And I was like, I am not writing a speech. Can you imagine having your winning speech and you've not won, and having that in your notebook to look at forever after? That would be really depressing. So of course I had no speech that I'd written. I had to just make it up on the spot.
And how did that go?
It was fine. I don't know. I would probably not watch it back, to be honest. I haven't seen
I've
it
tried
yet.
to find it and I couldn't find it anywhere.
Thank God.
But you know, it's a huge accolade to win the Forward Prize for Best Collection. I mean, you know, it's such an amazing achievement. And I'm sure you've got many more amazing achievements to come as well. But you know, and I looked at Twitter. You've got 11,000 followers on Twitter now. I don't know how many you had before, but I suspect you've become a bit more interesting to a lot more people who didn't perhaps know so well about you, unlike myself, of course, beforehand. Is that a nice feeling to sort of become a bit more of a, you know, you've almost got a mouthpiece now, haven't you?
Yeah, it has been. I mean, it's quite exposing as well, but it's been, in general, it's been great. Like, I've just had like a few more kind of offers for like media things, like Front Row, and gosh, I've forgotten. I was on Cerys Matthews' show as well. She's always been really supportive of my work right from when I had a pamphlet out. So, but the Front Row thing, I don't think would have happened without the Forward prizes. So there's nice things like that happening. But when the Guardian ran an article on the win on Twitter, if you look at the original article on the Guardian, straight away there's about 5 or 6 blokes like kicking off about it. They've not read the book, but they're like, oh, another woman going on about sexism, blah blah blah. So it's straight away it was like on there, and I just, again, it's like picking what you argue back with, because if I'd said anything to them, it would have just gone, lots of people would have stuck up for me, but it can call a lot of trolling down on you, and is it worth it to argue with people who are just doing it just for a reaction? So I just kind of kept quiet. But yeah, so there's things like that, but so far that's been the worst thing that's happened, and that's only like a little thing. But yeah, it's been nice. But to be honest, like, it feels pretty normal again now, because I planned loads of work for the week afterwards because I didn't think I was going to win. So I was like,
you in the school the next day or something? I can't remember.
The next 2 days I was doing schools workshops, because I was like, I'm going to be depressed that I haven't won. So I need to fill my time up and make sure I haven't got time to get depressed. So I filled all of this, you know, with work where people don't care. Like, children are lovely, but they don't really care about prizes. Like, they're not interested. They're interested in whether you do a good lesson and or a good workshop, and how you engage with them in that moment. So it was actually quite nice to just get away from all of that and be brought back down to earth, and just be, you know, it was quite stressful because it was busy, but it was nice to just be in school and just be writing again.
Yeah, I'm sure. Robin Harris saying, you don't have to watch it back. It was perfect. It was great, Tim. Sparing you the task of watching it back. It was perfect. That's a nice thing to say.
That's nice.
I'm sure it was. Can I just bring you back to sort of Cumbria and the work that you've done and you are doing to help, you know, promulgate the poetry culture of Cumbria? I mean, you obviously run the Kendal Poetry Festival. I think you've done 3 of those now. Can't remember.
5.
Okay. Which you do with different people, and the carousels that I first met you at, which were these beautiful 2 or 3 4-day events that take place somewhere in Cumbria. I went to one in Grange over Sands, where a bunch of people, I know George, I think, has been at one of those. 1 or 2 other people may have been as well, where poets get together for 2 or 3 days, and we have 4 different tutors, Kim being one of them, and then we have lots of readings to attend as well. It's just a really lovely immersive environment in which to write poetry and think about poetry, and that's something that you've organised for a number of years now. And I remember your blog was always, and still is very much, you know, this is what's going on, come and connect with this, the young poets at Grasmere. Is that an important, you know, do you kind of feel is that something that you've always done, sort of, you know, trying to help people get on? Do you feel obliged to do that? Do you enjoy doing that? Where does all that come from?
I think the residentials, I went on when I joined the Fourth Monday Poets, there's a brilliant Barrow poet called Jennifer Copley who told me to go on a residential. She was like, you need to get on a residential, you'll love it. And I went on one, and it just changed my life. I went from wanting to be a musician, teaching full-time music, being obsessed with trumpet playing, to suddenly being obsessed with poetry. And it was the residential that did that. And not just the tutors were amazing, but also the people that I met on that course, who are now, at that time they weren't published, they were just starting out, and now they've got you know, like Jackie Safra, who was shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot a couple of years ago, Jane Clark, who's published by Blood Axe. Lots of poets were on that course who then who became friends and colleagues now. So for me, those residentials, I think residentials can change your life, and I want to create places where that can happen for other people. So that's the kind of, it's like partly altruistic, like I want to share that what happened to me and be part of creating that, but then part of it is quite selfish as well. Like, it doesn't really feel like work to me. So to hang out for 4 days with 3 tutors that I really admire, so I always pick poets that I can learn stuff from, and by learn, I'm not in the workshops with them, but their conversations at dinner or speaking to them can inspire me and make me want to write. But then also getting to hang out with 30 people who paid to come on the course, who are all brilliant poets and friends, and a lot of them feel like family now. So that's, in that sense, it's quite selfish because I'm working, but it doesn't feel like work. It feels like socializing. But it is, you know, it is hard work, and I haven't done it this year because I've just been overwhelmed with everything. Basically, it's been, I decided to just take a year off doing it, but hopefully we'll do it next year.
I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah.
If anyone's got questions for Kim, by the way, just pop them into chat or just raise your hand and we'll get them in. I'm just looking at 1 or 2 of the comments, Kim, in chat. Sue says, "Congratulations, Kim's too, on getting a post at Manchester Met." I think you just got a full-time role there. Is that right? Because you've been teaching there for a while.
Yeah, well, I've got a permanent post now, but it's 0.5, so it's like half time. So I've been teaching there on temporary contracts or fixed term contracts for 6 years. Yeah, after 4 years, you're meant to be able to apply for permanency anyway, which I didn't know. So all of the university strikes about pay and conditions, part of it is about casualisation, which I've been really suffering from for 6 years now. I've been doing the 2-hour commute because I kept thinking I can't move any closer because I don't know if I'm going to have a job by next term. So yeah, it was only like a week and a half ago I got a phone call from my manager saying that they've made me, it was about 4 days before the forwards were announced, I think, that they've made me permanent. So I'm still part-time, which is fine for me because I can do other stuff. I like having other stuff to do, like the carousel and everything, to make up my income and everything. But it's so nice because, like, I've just finished teaching this first term with my first years, and I know that what I'm going to be teaching next year, and I can say, like, they know that some of them are going to be with me and some of them are going to be with other tutors, but they know that, you know, there's continuity there, whereas before I would get like a phone call the week before and be like, "Oh, Kim, do you want to teach on this unit?" So it's quite stressful.
Amy's just popped in there. I love the book cover artwork from Kim's collection. This is Kim's, I'm not sure, there we go. This is the first collection, which I've got here, The Art of Falling, which has got some beautiful poems in it. The Ode to the Scaffold, have I got that right? Which I think is about your dad, isn't it, to some extent?
Yeah, Psalm to the Scaffolders.
That's right, Psalm to the Scaffold. It's a beautiful poem, and there's all sorts of there's sort of lots of Cumbrian kind of nods to in this collection as well. So I really recommend The Art of Falling. Is the jacket design, is that, you know, an important thing for you? Of course it is, but how do you go about, you know, making that happen?
Oh, it's really stressful. I find it quite stressful because I don't feel like I know anything about art. So the first collection, we were looking around for different things, and my editor Amy Wack found this guy Nicholas Stedman and his beautiful paintings. So she got in touch with him and managed to get his agreement, you know, and they have some funding to pay him and everything. But this one, I don't know if you can, one.
Yeah.
This is Fred Tomaselli, who's an American poet, and my friend Amanda Dalton, who's a poet who I met at Manchester Met. I was saying to her, we're looking for a cover image and we can't find anything. This is awful. I'm so stressed. I'm just going to end up with a plain cover because I can't find it. And she said, "Check out this guy. This will be perfect for your book." And as soon as I saw it, that painting, I was like, that's the one. So I feel like I have no clue, and then I find it, and that's it.
It's a lovely jacket. Ron, come to your question in a second. Jill, you've got your hand up, and then we'll come to Ron.
Yeah, I put something into the chat because I was really interested to know where you did your PhD and who was backing you, because the whole, you're supervising and helping, because it sounds like a really creative, important time. So much has come out of it. And I'm reckoning you must have had a lot of support through the PhD. I just wondered who it was who was helping you out.
Yeah, so I did the PhD at Manchester Met, where I work now.
Yeah.
So, and I was supervised for the poetry by Michael Simmons-Roberts.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, so he really did just look at the poetry, and then then you have a critical supervisor who was Angelica Michelis, but then who was great as well, but then halfway through the process, because I was doing this quite part of the thesis is a choose your own adventure thesis, so it's got like options of what the reader wants to read next, whether they want to read a group of poems next or like an essay. So that the structure of the thesis was part of the this PhD requirement of making a new finding new knowledge sort of thing. So I got a third supervisor who was like a specialist in creative critical research called Nikolai Duffy, and that he was just absolutely amazing. Like once I got him as my third supervisor, then I was just away and, you know, really enjoying like having the space to experiment and be creative with the form of the thesis as well as the poems and the critical writing. But that's quite rare. I think it's still quite rare for people to actually understand what a creative critical PhD is. They're still fairly new animals. Even in, you know, in universities, there's only a few people in our department, I would say, that really understand what they are. And part of that is because you have to create it yourself. Like I spent a year waiting for someone to tell me what to do, and you can't, that doesn't work with a PhD. You have to just get on and
Sure.
do it.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank
You, Jill. Let's cross to Ron, who's in Barbados. Come off mute, Ron. Just come off mute, Ron. Okay.
Is that better?
Yep.
As you see, I love living in Furness. It's all around me, behind me now. And I wondered how important it was for you to be in Furness. Does it come into your poems much? Do you feel that's an inspiration where you live?
It did for the first collection, definitely, but the second collection, because it's been more like writing about people and the spaces in between people, the setting hasn't really come in a lot, mainly because you find sexist men everywhere, not just in Cumbria. But yeah, I mean, the setting in terms of like the people I've met, it's always about people for me, like the Cumbrian poetry community and the scene. It's been so important to me, and the you know, I really love them all. And it's I always think I sound really like Pollyanna about it, because but I don't think it's the same in other places in the country. Like I think, you know, it can get quite competitive, but here it's always felt like really collegial to me, and like we support each other, and people will go out their way, they travel many miles to come and support your event, because we don't have a lot, and what we have to get up and do ourselves. So yeah, I would always say come back to the people. It's the people that are important. But maybe next book I'll start writing about mountains or something. I really should when living in Cumbria. I think you know, it would be useful if I did that. I'll probably start writing about Cumbria if I ever moved away, because yearning is my favorite emotion. So I would just write poems full of yearning for the mountains after leaving them all. So
final question from Chris, and then I'm going to invite you, Kim, if you'd like to read us one more poem from your collection, that would be fantastic. But Chris, I think you've got a question about music.
Yes, to which Ian has added a coda. I just wondered if you still, is there still music in your life? Do you perform? Do you just kind of amuse yourself with the trumpet occasionally? Where is the music?
This is a really complicated question answer, Chris, because so basically I stopped playing for about 10 years because I started getting really bad performance anxiety and stopped enjoying it. So I went from kind of playing semi-professionally around Cumbria to not playing at all, other than teaching Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and whatever I was teaching. And then I did join a soul band, but I was still finding it quite stressful to do the gigs. But I enjoyed it because it was different to doing classical music. But then in lockdown, the trumpet was kind of sat there, and it felt like it was looking at me with its evil eye, because there was nowhere to go. We were all stuck in our houses. And I thought, I'm going to start I started writing about it, but it wouldn't come out as poetry. It came out as prose, and I thought, it feels, to me, the trumpet still feels like this bruise that every time I touch it, it still hurts. So I thought, I want to try and write that out and see what's going on there, because I've never really worked out why I get such bad performance anxiety, even though I don't, you know, I care more about poetry than I do about the trumpet. In one sense, that's my career, that's what I want to do, but the trumpet is like this source of pain still. And so I wrote this book, which came out in May, and writing the book made me realize how much I love the trumpet still, underneath all that kind of angst and never quite reaching what I wanted to reach. So now I do performances from the book, the trumpet book, which is called What the Trumpet Taught Me, which I don't know if I've got one there. It's like a little, so I read from the book and I intersperse it with playing bits of trumpet, almost like aversion therapy, to try and expose myself. And that's been really lovely. It's made me realize that the trumpet can be a creative tool as well, whereas before I just used to play it as like a classical musician. I've got to get this perfect, and there's no room for my creativity because I've got to replicate what the composer wanted. So now I'm using it much more creatively, and at the minute I'm doing playing the Arbon, which is like the Brass Players Bible, cover to cover challenge with one of my old teachers, and I'm posting a video up every day on Facebook of me doing one of the little exercises, which is not perfect, but I'm quite, again, just like exposure therapy, like trying to get over this perfectionism. It doesn't have to be perfect. I can just post this up and it doesn't matter, because I'm not playing for money. I did do a Baroque trumpet gig in January, which was like a professional gig, and I suffered from exactly the same performance anxiety as I always do. So I got through it, and people said, oh, that was great, Kim, but I'm always never pleased with it. I'm so hard on myself. So I have to be careful, like how much I expose myself to that kind of really harsh, critical inner voice.
Have you worked out why that is the case with the trumpet, but not with the poetry?
No, writing the book, no. I think the trumpet feels so, with the poetry, there's always, writing, there's always, for me, there's always something to hide behind. So even though it might feel like the book is quite exposing because I've said, oh, it's about an ex-boyfriend, blah, 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 but I am choosing what I really reveal in every single one of those poems. I am in complete control of what you get to hear as a reader. Whereas with the trumpet, I have no control of, I mean, I do have control because I practice and I've done hours of practice, but at the end of the day, it's just a bit of plumbing. And you're not in control of what comes out. Sometimes it just kicks back at you. It's like it feels like an alive thing that has its own mind, and also, your breath is going into the trumpet. It's the most personal thing we have, right? That's coming out. So maybe it's something to do with that. I never know whether it's going to be a good trumpet day or a bad trumpet day. But when I stand up to read, I know I can do a good performance. I'm in control.
Thank you.
Great question. Kim, let's have a second poem from you, which I know we'd all absolutely love to hear.
Okay. Sorry, I should have got my finger in the page.
That's all right.
So maybe so this is the poem I read after I found, this was my second poem that I sent to the forwards, and they said, send a poem that you want to read after you've won. And this was me taking the mickey, because it's a poem about one of those reactions from audience members to and this poet, the person it's about, is still at large in the Cumbrian poetry community. So I'm just putting it on gallery to check he's not here. He's not here. So I can safely read it. So, All the Men I Never Married, number 12. After the reading, a man waits around to tell me the poem I read about a beautiful man who thought he knew everything was objectifying men. How would it feel if the gender of the protagonist was reversed, he says triumphantly. I reply that it would feel like most other love poems in the course of human history. He says, aha, so this is really a very ordinary subject. I say, yes, if you discount subversion and poetic tradition and female desire, More accurately, I only get to subversion and poetic tradition and female before he interrupts me to tell me how disappointed he is, as I'm a better writer than this, wasting my talent making cheap shots about men. The man in my poem does spend the whole poem naked, so maybe he is a little bit objectified, but I like him that way. I start to write a poem about the opinionated man who is busy shaking his head at my misunderstanding of beautiful men and their complex desires, which I've only skimmed over in my original poem by not giving my man a voice of his own, not allowing him to tell his own story. I'm about to make a general and sweeping statement about men when he interrupts again. Isn't the man in your poem a bit one-dimensional, he opines? Can't you make him more interesting? Just trying to be helpful, he says, holding his hands up like two little flags, like two dishcloths, like two dead moles hung on a fence. I reply, no, I can't. That is the best thing about him. Or maybe I'm just wishing I said that. Maybe I just smiled, nodded my head.
Kim, thank you. That was number 12, right?
Yes, yeah.
Number 12. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to say.
No, you did say it. I was just checking I got the number right. It's a beautiful collection that's been totally recognized nationally and beyond as a fantastic collection of poetry. It's deeply original, and it's a beautiful collection. So thank you, Kim, so much for sharing those two poems with us, but also just giving us a few little insights into how you work and your thinking about how you work as well. It's been a real treat and a real delight.
Thank you for inviting me, Tom. It's been
absolute
great.
pleasure. And do check out chat before you go, because there's some lovely comments about it. Thank you so much, Kim Moore, trumpet playing Kim Moore, who's doing something every day that you can check out on Facebook as well, on trumpet playing. Fantastic stuff. What a talent. Okay, it's 10:25. Thank you, Kim. Kate, I think you were gonna do a little look ahead to next year while we're all together. Ian is treating us to his new hairdo, which is fantastic. He wins the prize for this morning. Some strong entries all around, clearly. Kate, over to you.
Okay, yeah, it's so difficult to follow that. I won't even try, really. Thank you so much, Kim. Yeah, I just wanted to make quite a big announcement, actually, which is a little bit dry compared to that lovely poetry, but important. So as of the 1st of January 2023, Cumbria Arts and Culture Network will be its own little limited company, not for profit limited company. So we leave the Cumbria LEP, who have hosted us for the last 12-18 months, and prior to that Cumbria CBS. So from the 1st of January, we will no longer be hosted by anybody. We will be our very own company. It's a bit scary, I have to say, but equally it's exciting that we'll be independent and we can do our own thing. So the 5 directors who couldn't leave the room quickly enough and have ended up, you know, holding the directorships are me and Stefan Eskreet from Ragged Edge Productions, Maddie Nicholson from Art Gene, Liz Stevenson from Theatre by the Lake, and Richard Buster, formerly of the brewery in these days of the Lakes International Comic Art Festival. So there's 5 of us, and we're doing it really because we just want Cumbria Arts and Culture Network to keep going, not because we are on some kind of power grab at all. In future, we will be setting up an advisory group that works alongside the sort of people who are technically running the company. And that's something that we'll be working on over the next 6 months. We're also hoping that we might be able to pay a director to run Cumbria Arts and Culture Network, because up to now it's pretty much been me and the steering group on a voluntary basis, as well as more recently we have Amy and Tom and Chris all here today on a few hours a week freelance contracts. So this is about how we sustain what we do. So yeah, it's really kind of important few weeks as we make our exit from Cumbria LEP and start to fly solo. I don't think you'll notice any difference, but believe me, behind the scenes, we are very much running to keep up and get ourselves functioning as a little company. Kim said something, well, lots of things that are really interesting, but one thing that I just jotted down is that in Cumbria, we don't have a lot, but what we have to make ourselves. And that is absolutely how we've ended up here as the Cumbria Arts and Culture Network, because we've created it all together. And I absolutely want us to continue being able to come together, not just on Friday mornings, because there's much more to Cumbria Arts and Culture Network than these wonderful calls. But in all the ways that we connect people and champion everything that you do. So thank you very much. That's it from me. And Merry Christmas to all of you. Tom.
Thank you, Kate. Any questions from anyone about any of that before we part our ways? No, okay, all right, lovely. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming with us on this journey this year. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for all your time this year, everybody who's joined these calls. Thanks for everyone who's contributed as well. I think we're going to catch up again on the 13th of January is the next Friday in my diary. So we're going to have a bit of a Christmas break, but then back on the 13th of January, when we shall do lots of this sort of stuff again and do some more as well. So nice to see you all. Thank you. Have a great break. I think I'm allowed to say Happy Christmas, and we can all say Happy Christmas to each other if we want to.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy Christmas.
Cheers.
Merry
Merry
Christmas.
Christmas.
Everyone.
Go
Happy
Jewel.
Christmas.